All right, so today we're diving into adult coloring books.
Okay.
But not the ones you're thinking of. We're going deeper. It's watercolor coloring books. And our sources are saying big things like untapped goldmine even.
Right. Like huge potential, right?
Yeah. They're even saying there are billions of dollars to be made. Like, whoa, hold on. Billions?
Yeah, well, the adult coloring book market, it's booming.
Okay.
It's already a $1.5 billion industry.
Yeah.
And, projections show it could hit $4.3 billion by 2027.
Wow.
So there's definitely potential for growth there, especially for niche markets.
Okay, so we've got like this market that's like ready to explode and then this exciting like new spin with watercolor.
Right.
But how realistic are these claims of watercoloring books being this like untapped gold mine?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? That's where we need to kind of put on our analytical goggles and look past the hype.
Yeah.
And, consider Susan's story.
Okay.
She's actually published 2 watercolor coloring books.
Wow.
And she went from, 0 to published author.
Nice.
And get this, she even uses AI to generate her designs.
Wow, that's impressive. And then there's Jennifer, who uses these books in her mindfulness coaching workshops.
Yeah.
So it seems like there's some real excitement bubbling up, at least from people already, doing this.
Absolutely, and that enthusiasm is important. Those stories highlight the existing interest, right? Like combining creativity, mindfulness, and the appeal of watercolor.
Totally.
But I think what's fascinating is WHY Susan's approach is working. So if we dig a little deeper, we see she didn't just create any watercolor coloring books.
Yeah.
She strategically published both, like the traditional coloring book versions, A&D watercolor versions of her designs.
Oh, interesting.
So by offering both, she's catering to a wider audience, right?
Yeah.
And potentially, tapping into those existing customers from that traditional coloring book market.
Smart.
That's a strategic move we can all learn from.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So it's not just about like throwing some watercolor designs on thicker paper.
Right.
It's about actually like understanding what the market wants
Exactly.
and finding those strategies.
And speaking of paper, that's something else these sources kind of gloss over a bit. We can't talk about watercolor coloring books without considering the logistics of actually producing these things.
Right.
The paper is crucial.
Yeah.
You need thicker, more absorbent
I know,
paper,
like,
right?
yeah.
To prevent the buckling, the bleed through.
For sure.
And this can get pricey, especially when you're talking about high quality acid-free paper that won't yellow over time.
Yeah.
So right off the bat, we're talking higher production costs than your standard coloring book.
Right.
And those costs, well, they impact your profit margins and your pricing strategies.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good point. These sources make it sound as easy as like, you find a cool design, you hit print. They talk a lot about using AI to create the designs, which seems amazing, don't get me wrong, for efficiency, but it also makes me wonder.
About the double-edged sword of AI.
Yeah.
You're right. AI can be a game changer for creating designs quickly and easily, especially if you're just starting out.
Sure.
But that ease of creation also means the barrier to entry is lower, which inevitably leads to more competition.
Right.
And when you have a flood of coloring books hitting the market, the question becomes, how does yours stand out? It's like having a double-edged paintbrush.
Okay.
This ties into another thing they kept saying, no art skills needed.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, sure, you might not need to be like the next Da Vinci to use AI to make designs.
Right.
But what about the people who are actually using these books?
Yeah.
The ones buying them?
Yeah.
Are we saying everyone's just like naturally gifted with watercolor?
That's a good point. Watercolor is kind of tricky, right? Like I've tried it, and let's just say my serene landscape ended up looking like more of a swamp monster attack, honestly.
Right. And that's where I think there's a disconnect.
Okay.
The sources talk about like targeting everyone. Aspiring artists, mindfulness enthusiasts, even just hobbyists who want something relaxing.
Yeah.
That feels incredibly broad. Like almost like they're hoping to just like cast this wide net and catch anyone who's like remotely interested in being creative.
So how do you avoid that trap? How do you go from like that wide net to actually finding like your people in the coloring book world?
You got to niche down.
Okay.
Instead of trying to be everything to everyone, what if you focus on like a specific theme or interest group?
Okay.
For example, instead of just like a generic coloring book,
Yeah.
you create one specifically for like travel lovers, featuring those intricate designs of famous landmarks or exotic destinations.
Hmm.
Or maybe it's nature-themed, like delicate florals or majestic animals.
Right.
By narrowing your focus, you're creating something that resonates, more deeply
For sure.
with the specific audience.
Okay.
And that makes it way easier to market it and to stand out.
Okay, so we're talking about niching down, understanding like the actual like ins and outs of producing these things, navigating AI.
Right.
But even with all of that, these sources keep coming back to this idea of like this being the world first opportunity.
Right.
It's almost like they're saying if you jump in right now, you're guaranteed success.
There's a lot of enthusiasm, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
There's definitely a sense of excitement, like tapping into something new and potentially lucrative, right?
Yeah.
But I think we have to remember that, every successful product, every thriving niche market, it starts with really understanding who you're talking to.
Right.
It's not enough to just create a product.
Yeah.
You have to create a connection.
Yeah. So it's not just about the coloring book itself.
Exactly.
It's about the whole story you're telling.
100%.
The experience you're creating for the customer.
Think about those testimonials we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Susan and Jennifer.
Yeah.
They both found success, but they did it by creating a whole experience around their product.
Right.
Susan offered different versions of her designs to appeal to more people.
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer integrated her books into her coaching business, so she's blending her passion for mindfulness with the joy of watercolor.
Right. So it's finding those synergies,
Exactly.
those connections between your passion, your product, and who you're making it for.
Absolutely. And that's something that no AI, no matter how advanced, can replicate, right?
Right.
It comes down to human ingenuity, to creativity, to that genuine desire to connect with others who share your interests.
It's making me think, like, if I were to create a watercolor coloring book, I would want to find a way to tap into that sense of community.
Right.
Like maybe create like an online space where people could share their finished pieces, exchange tips and tricks, or even do like virtual watercolor workshops.
Now you're thinking. And that's exactly the kind of creative thinking that can turn a good idea into a thriving business.
Wow.
These sources touch on this community aspect, but briefly, right?
Yeah.
It's important to highlight that building a community around your product can be just as important as the product itself.
Yeah.
It creates engagement, loyalty, that sense of belonging.
So it's about building a brand,
Exactly.
not just a product.
And a strong brand is built on trust, authenticity, and that deep understanding of what your audience needs and wants.
This reminds me of something you mentioned earlier, market research.
Yes.
It's not the sexiest part of starting a business, but it sounds pretty crucial here.
It's crucial. Before you even think about sketching your first design or picking up those watercolors, you need to understand the landscape.
Okay.
What's already out there? What's selling? What are the gaps? Who are you competing with?
Right.
These are all questions that market research can answer, and it can give you really valuable insights.
So before you even pick a color palette, you've got to pick apart the market.
Exactly.
What are the trends? Who's buying? And most importantly, what's missing?
Exactly. Think of it like choosing the right paper for your watercolor masterpiece, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't just use any old sheet, would you?
Right.
You'd want something that can handle the water, the pigment, the creative vision you have in mind.
Right.
Market research is like choosing the right foundation for your business.
Okay.
It's about making sure it can support your ambitions and lead to, a masterpiece.
All right, so we've got market research covered. We've talked about niching down, understanding your audience, even the community aspect.
Yeah.
But with all these factors, AI, competition, the actual production of these things, it seems like the learning curve for this untapped niche is maybe a little steeper than these sources initially suggested.
Absolutely. Enthusiasm is important, but it does need to be tempered with a healthy dose of realism.
Yeah.
And a willingness to put in the work.
Right.
There's potential in the coloring book market, no doubt.
Yeah.
But it requires careful planning, good execution, and a deep understanding of your audience, the competitive landscape, and the unique value you bring to the table.
So it's not about chasing a get-rich-quick scheme. It's about approaching this with open eyes, a strategic mind, and maybe even a little watercolor test sheet to practice those techniques.
Now you're talking. It's about combining that passion with pragmatism.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to something we touched on earlier. Those sources that present this as a world-first opportunity.
Yeah.
And while it might not be entirely new, there is some truth to tapping into a fresh, evolving market.
Yeah, it reminds me of how like so many successful businesses started, you know? Like someone saw that gap, that way to like merge those passions with a need that no one's meeting and boom, suddenly you've got this whole community forming around it.
Exactly. And that's where that genuine excitement lies. It's not even just about like the profit, but being part of something new, something creatively fulfilling.
Yeah.
Imagine like tapping into that mindfulness these sources talk about,
Right.
but combining it with like that flow state, that creative release of watercolor.
Okay, that does sound pretty enticing, not gonna lie. Hey, you've got my creative wheels turning now.
But before I like run off and buy all the watercolor paper and brushes,
Hmm.
let's bring it back to our listener for a sec.
Okay.
If someone's listening and thinking, okay, I want to try this whole watercolor coloring book thing,
Yeah.
what's like the one piece of advice that could like make or break their success?
I would say focus on your unique selling proposition
Yeah.
or your USP. Why should someone pick your coloring book over the like hundreds of others they could buy?
Right.
Is it the theme, the designs? Maybe you partnered with like a well-known watercolor artist or mindfulness guru to give it some like, credibility and reach a wider audience.
Right.
The key is like differentiating yourself,
Okay.
finding that spark that makes you stand out.
So it's about going beyond just creating like a beautiful product.
100%.
It's about crafting like a whole experience, a community, a vibe even.
Yes, because at the end of the day, that's not something AI can replicate, no matter how fancy it gets.
Yeah.
It's about human connection, creativity, and understanding what speaks to your audience on a deeper level.
We really went on a journey today.
We did.
We went from like billion-dollar projections and
Yeah.
AI to market research and even just like the perfect cup of tea while you're, letting those watercolors flow.
We explored the colorful world of watercolor coloring books.
We did.
And as we discovered, it's this landscape full of potential challenges and opportunities for incredible creativity.
So for anyone listening who's feeling inspired to, I don't know, pick up a paintbrush or even just look at those adult coloring books a little differently, here's something to think about.
Hmm.
If you were making the ultimate watercolor coloring book, what would make it so irresistible that people would be like lining up to buy it? What's that magic ingredient? That speaks to your passions, A&E, what your customer wants.
Yeah.
That's something worth exploring, right?
Absolutely. Sometimes, like, the best journeys start with a single question, a spark of curiosity.
Totally.
And who knows, maybe that question will lead to the next, like, big wave of creativity in the watercolor world.